Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Couch GMs podcast. I'm your host, George Kerth, with the two other P's in the pod, Tyler Snyder.
How's it going?
And Cody Roadcap.
What is up, everybody? Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of the Couch GMs podcast. If it's your first time, thank you. If you haven't checked out our special episodes from yesterday, please go back and listen to them. But a little bit about the Couch GMs podcast. We're three best friends. We love talking football. We're just trying to make an entertaining show. We can talk fantasy football and just have a bunch of fun.
And if you're wondering what you can expect from listening to our show, well, I'll tell you. We're going to get some weekly breakdowns and predictions of every single matchup. Going to give you guys some fantasy advice, some bold predictions, and we're just going to have some fun talking foosball.
And we want you all to get involved in the conversation as well. You can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at the Couch GMs.
Alrighty, guys, let's look back to last week. Again, I don't really want to. If you've been following us on social, you saw that I finished last place with only getting 6 correct game picks. It's pretty embarrassing. George, you didn't do much better, but you got to at least 500. Tyler had another strong performance at 9-5. Tyler is blowing away the competition on the overall standings at 59-28. Me and George are actually tied for second place, 51-36. So still a lot of season left. Things can change, but it's not looking good for me.
I love seeing it personally. And not only am I leading in the picks, but finally, boys, we have our first bold prediction correct of the season. I made a bold prediction last week that we would have a new lowest scoring game of the season, which would have to be below 24 combined points, and the Raiders and Browns combined for 22 points. So I hit that one right. Cody, you predicted that Mike Zimmer would be fired, and that didn't actually happen.
Wasn't even close. Yeah, he almost got Mike Patton fired.
And yeah, he did. And George, your prediction was that Matt Stafford would throw for 5 touchdowns. That also did not happen. But that's enough about last week. Let's move on into this week, starting with our possibly biggest headline of the week, which is the 49ers injuries. They're losing Jimmy G for a long time and George Kittle for possibly the entire season.
Those are definitely some big blows for the 49ers. Not only are they injured, but they had a positive COVID test come out on Wednesday. They can't seem to catch a break. Just a fun fact from the NFC Championship game with the Packers and the 49ers rematching this coming week, not a single person that touched the ball on offense in that game will be active this week because of injuries. So you can tell that team is hurting. And, man, I think it's time for them just to pack it in and try to save what little left of their roster.
I mean, I thought the Eagles' injuries were really bad, but wow, that's insane.
But the 49ers injuries are not the only headlines from this week. We also had the trade deadline, which was a little underwhelming. We did get to see Quan Alexander traded to the Saints, Desmond King traded to the Titans. So I'm actually going to open up to our fan questions of the week. We had a few submitted, and first one is by Chance A, and it was, why was the trade deadline so dead this year? And do you think the virus played a role in it?
I mean, I think the virus definitely had something to do with it, with having to go through the protocols of if someone gets traded, they basically can't play the next week because they have to quarantine for 6 days before they go into another building. But if you look at it, since the 2017 deadline where a bunch of stuff went down, none of the deadlines have been really exciting at all. There's been a couple little moves and that's it. So this kind of seems to be the new norm, unfortunately. I mean, I'd like to think there'd be a few more deals, but I don't know if any of the blockbusters would have ever came to be even without the virus.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, that 2017 year might be even more of an exception. The NFL trade deadline has never been very active. We're hoping to see more teams going all in on this year. And I don't think the virus directly played a part of it, as in, the protocols and stuff like that. But the possible outcome with the lost revenue and the salary cap potentially dipping, I know that was like a big reason like the Packers didn't go after Will Fuller, was because they didn't want a rental because they knew they couldn't pay him with the cap dropping. So I think indirectly the virus played a role in it.
Okay, and our second question comes from Russell H, and he asks, "Do you think Carson Wentz will ever shake the ghosts of Nick Foles?" George, why don't you take this one as our resident Eagles fan?
So it was before this past week. So week after week 7, the Eagles had lined up in the playoff picture to play the Chicago Bears in the first round. And the first thing that came to my mind was maybe that's what Carson Wentz needs to shake the ghost of Nick Foles. He needs to beat him in a playoff game. I mean, there's not many ways that I can feel like he could shake it. I think it's in his head. And I heard somebody say, I think it was on the podcast, one of the mid-season special episodes. It feels like he feels the need to win the Super Bowl with every single throw. And that's why he's taking too much. He's making so many mistakes. I think either he needs to beat Nick Foles to prove to himself, oh my God, I got it. Or maybe it needs to be a coaching change. I mean, he's been not quite the same as his MVP looking 2017 year since Frank Reich left to be head coach of the Colts. So maybe it's a coaching change. I'm not saying get rid of Doug Peterson, but bring in a new look at offensive coordinator, somebody that can sit down with Carson and give him a fresh perspective.
Yeah, I think that Carson Wentz either needs to go to a new team and just have a complete fresh start, like you mentioned, or I think the Eagles need to do a better job of surrounding him with talent to try to take some of the pressure off of him. Right now, all of the pressure is on his shoulders to try to live up to the Super Bowl win that Foles had. If they could get him some good receivers that can actually stay healthy, a defense that can, you know, hold the Eagles in closer games so Wentz doesn't have to do as much, or just more playmakers, I believe it might take some of the pressure off Wentz. He might stop trying to force it so much. I think him trying to do so much is what's actually causing all of his issues right now.
I completely agree. I do think playmakers are a big thing for Wentz. He needs some more help around him. They got to stop with this Jalen Hurts coming in. They should have drafted a different offensive weapon. They need to get that offensive line right. And George, I like your point about a new head coach. I don't think Doug Peterson is a bad coach, but I do think we've seen since Frank Reich has left that maybe the offense isn't completely up to Doug P. I think Frank Reich did have some input, and now that he's gone, has left an impression. But that's pretty much it for our fan questions for this week. As always, free to submit questions. We might talk about them here on the podcast. We can reply to you if it's a Sunday sit start question. Just feel free to always get involved. But let's move into our week 9 picks and predictions. As a reminder, we'll post them up after the show so you guys can comment, tell us what we did wrong, who you like, etc. And we got the Thursday night football game that some people can't even believe it's being played. We had the Green Bay Packers at the San Francisco 49ers. The Packers are coming off an embarrassing loss against the Minnesota Vikings, but are 6.5-point favorites in this game. And I think the injuries are the reason we're all picking Green Bay. But what are your guys' thoughts?
It is the COVID watch game of the week. I feel like I should have introed it like that, but I'll take what you got here. Yeah, if you didn't hear in the beginning, we were talking about news. The 49ers closed their facility on Wednesday thanks to a positive test. The Packers could be down to RB4 because they had a running back get COVID, and Jamal Williams, the backup, who was the starter with Aaron Jones banged up, was a close contact and won't be able to play. So Aaron Jones was listed as questionable. That kind of scares me for Green Bay. But with everybody decimated on the 49ers and Cody's fact of no one that played in that NFC championship game last year is going to even be out there to touch the ball, that I can't pick them over Green Bay.
Yeah, I got to agree with you there, George. I really don't think the San Francisco has a chance in this game. But to be honest with you, I'm actually excited to see Nick Mullins. Now, I know how ridiculous that sounds, but last week against the Seahawks, the 49ers just looked lost. They looked like they had no way of competing with the Seahawks. They had no way of staying in the game. And then Jimmy G got hurt. And when he did, Nick Mullins stepped in and he kind of just let the ball fly more. And they actually came back in the game. And at one point, they were a 2-point conversion away from making a 1-score game late in the game. So I think that Nick Mullins, he might make some mistakes at times, make some bad decisions, but I like the fact that he's willing to throw it around. He's got nothing left to lose. Just go for it. And I think that might actually add some value to some of the 49ers players. Like Brandon Ayuk is mainly the one that I like in this one. Ayuk has been a borderline flex starter most of the year, but once Mullins came in last week, Ayuk saw a lot more targets, even a late game touchdown. I think that he would be a great flex play moving forward, possibly even wide receiver too. You might be able to trade for him cheap right now if you can. And if you can, go out and get him. George Kittle's not going to be getting the red zone targets anymore because he's no longer there. Jordan Reed is coming back off IR soon, but I don't think that he can stay healthy for very long. So go out and get Brandon Ayuk.
Don't just completely flash over Jordan Reed, though. If he is out there on your waiver wire, pick him up, throw him on your reserve. And he's probably going to get hurt again, but if he gets you 1 or 2 good weeks in key situations going down the stretch into the fantasy playoffs, that's big.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to Ayuk quick. I actually don't think this is the week to start him because of all the injuries. Jair Alexander for the Packers has been shutting the number one wide receiver down for a fantasy perspective and in game stats. We saw it all the way back to the Falcons and Calvin Ridley getting goose egged. Mike Evans had one catch. Justin Jefferson didn't really do anything last week. So with no one outside of Ayuk, I'd be a little concerned with playing him or relying on him this week. But to Tyler's point, I do think he has a bright. So if he does have another bad week, you could probably get him even cheaper if people don't even drop him. But before we move on from this game, I just want to get your guys' thoughts. The NFL has been pretty consistent on, wanting to protect the players and doing all the scheduling adjustments. What what do you guys think that they haven't postponed this game to Sunday or Monday with the 49ers having a positive on Wednesday, the Packers having a positive Monday morning, and it's not like they don't have time. Like they could push it back to Monday and that's the 5 days they need to clear it out. Blows my mind that this game hasn't been moved. What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, it's extra frustrating to me being a Titans fan because obviously we all know earlier in the season the Titans had a COVID outbreak. Now, I understand they had a larger outbreak with more players getting COVID positive, but the NFL didn't hesitate to postpone the game, move it back later in the week, and then postpone it as soon as another player came up positive. And now suddenly, when it's a Thursday night game, so it's technically prime time and it's bigger teams, so they might make more money off the game than they would from a Titans game. Now they don't want to postpone it. I think it's completely money driven. I think they need to stop lying and saying that it's all about protecting the players and they just feel safe with this one. It's about money. They don't care about the Titans getting COVID because the Titans aren't a big market team. The Packers are. The Packers are a very, very liked team. A lot of people are going to tune in to watch that game. So, of course, they don't want to postpone it to a Sunday when all the other games are going on. I think that's completely money driven. I think that's the reason why they have it going on. And there's no excuse for it. It needs to be pushed back to at least Sunday.
I agree with you, Tyler. It is definitely a money driven decision. But at the same time, if you look at outside of the first week to 2 weeks when they started having the COVID outbreaks, they're handling this game exactly the same as they have every other single outbreak. So, I think it just gets more attention because it's Packers 49ers and because it's Thursday night football. But this is completely in line with what they've been doing with every game since the first week when they had the Patriots situation and the Titans situation.
Whether they're handling it the same way or not, I just don't think they're handling it properly. I think you need to be extra cautious. Especially when there is an out. Like, I understand if you have a game that's on a Monday and you're afraid to push it back to a Tuesday, that won't really do you much good. I mean, I understand that trying to keep playing it, but this is a Thursday night game in a league that's predominantly a Sunday night league. So push it to Sunday. I mean, there's no reason to have to keep it on Thursday.
I completely agree. I think to George's point, I think it's because both teams have experienced COVID issues, and the day before the game, the facility was shut down. I just think the timing doesn't make much sense. But let's move on from this game. We've talked enough about it and head into the 1 o'clock games on Sunday. And we got a good old division rival off the top with the New York football Giants against the Washington football team. The Giants are 2.5 point underdogs. Wow. A lot of people have some respect on the football team. I can't even believe that's real. But let's just say the Washington football team has some fans in Vegas. So, what are you guys' thoughts on this game?
Now, I will say that I think Washington football team has an amazing pass rush. They have Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Ryan Kerrigan, among others that can definitely get to Daniel Jones. And we saw last week that Daniel Jones actually struggles under pressure. When a defender gets in his face, he does make some errant throws, some bad decisions. However, I still personally believe that the football giants are better than the football team. I think that their defense is actually better than a lot of people give them credit. And I still think that they have better offensive weapons than the football team. I have really no faith in the football team at all. And that's why I'm going to go with the Giants in this matchup.
I am going to actually take Washington in this one. I know you mentioned their defensive line and pass rush and how Danny Pennies does not do well under pressure, and we saw it, and I think that's going to be the difference. They're going to force one or two turnovers. It's going to turn into short fields and scores, even though Washington's offense does not perform well. They're not going to need to in those situations, and that's going to be the difference. They're just going to protect the ball. They're not going to do anything special. It's going to be a boring game, but I think Washington can win it if they pressure Danny Dimes and get one or two turnovers in short fields.
I think you guys both make great points, and really, this game for me is just a coin flip. And Tyler, you have a big lead, so I got to catch you. So I'm going to go against you and agree with George, which is probably mistake number one. But I'm going to go with the football team as well, mainly just because of their defensive line. Maybe it was because we spent yesterday talking to football team fan Mark D, but I'm going to go football team on this one.
So my issue with that is, like I said, Danny Dimes or Danny Pennies definitely struggles against the pass rush. Um, And he definitely is going to be facing a tough defense in the football team. But last week we saw him go up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, who have a much, I'd say, equally as good or better defense with Devin White and all those other players on that team. And he still came a 2-point conversion away from sending it to overtime. And the Buccaneers, I think, easily have a better offense. So if he was able to be that close against a Buccaneers team that is similar but better than the football team, I think that this shouldn't even be a problem for him. He should win this game easily.
A blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while.
Wow, George is coming in with hammer comments like that. I was just going to say, I think last week was a little bit of a fluky week in a sense. We saw a couple good teams lose, a couple good teams go down to the wire. And one of those good teams that lost to a team we didn't expect was your Tennessee Titans. And they're going to look to rebound this week against the Chicago Bears, as the Bears are 6-point underdogs. And no surprise here, we all have the Tennessee Titans. I'm done picking Chicago. I was doing it. They've lost last 2 weeks. I have no faith in them. I don't have any faith in Nick Foles. And I think Trubisky, he does have a shoulder injury, but it's not too much longer before they go back to him.
I want to talk about the Trubisky injury for a second and get Tyler riled up a little bit. I saw one play in that game where they put him in and used him in the Taysom Hill role and had him run a quarterback draw. And I texted you two and was like, I cannot believe they're actually doing this with someone like Mitch Trubisky. And he hurts his shoulder on that play and might have structural damage. Tyler, just tell me how that frustrates you.
I mean, come on, people. If you guys listen to our special midseason podcast, the NFC version, I talked about Taysom Hill. If you guys haven't listened, go ahead and check them out. But I talked about Taysom Hill and how frustrating he is because you don't take a good quarterback out of the game to throw in a random backup and then put him back in the game. It throws quarterbacks out of their rhythm. And I mean, this time it's not taking a good quarterback out, it's just putting Trubisky in there. I mean, Nick Foles isn't a good quarterback. But at the same time, like, why? Like, what is the reasoning behind doing this? Why not keep Foles in there and instead of putting in Trubisky, put in a different playmaker that can actually do something? And now you just injured your backup quarterback. You guys are 5-2. You have a chance at uh, making the playoffs with their record. They're in the playoff hunt. So now you injured your backup quarterback. If Foles can't do it and you have to turn back to Trubisky, what happens if you would have had more of a major injury? You don't have somebody else to turn to then. It makes absolutely no sense to me.
It was definitely a little bit different last year in New Orleans when they would use Taysom Hill, but he wasn't even their backup quarterback. It was Teddy Bridgewater. So, I mean, that's definitely a great point to that.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. Just want to throw out another fun fact. I saw that Nick Foles has committed a turnover in 6 straight games. So if that doesn't scream starter, full faith quarterback, I don't know what does.
Absolutely. I'm being a Titans fan. I'm frustrated after watching them lose to the Cincinnati Bengals. It was such an ugly game. I couldn't believe how bad the Titans looked. Their defense got exposed. I'm really hoping that the Titans cutting Vic Beasley. They cut their long snapper. They cut Jonathan Joseph. They traded for Desmond King, which I think will be a big upgrade on that defensive secondary. I think making all those moves might light a fire under the Titans, and they might finally start playing up to the level that we expect them to be playing. But if not, the Titans might honestly be a fraud. If they can't figure out a way to fix this defense, I don't think the offense is going to have enough to keep up and keep winning them games at a high level they did in the beginning of the year. Um, so keep a close eye on that Titans defense and see if they can turn this around, or the season might be in jeopardy.
You heard it here first. The resident Titans fan is on the brink of calling his team a fraud. Never thought I'd see the day. But that's enough of that. Those NFC North teams. Let's move on to an NFC North matchup with the Detroit Lions at the Minnesota Vikings. Detroit are 4-point underdogs. They've lost Kenny Galladay again. Matt Stafford hit the COVID list. We have to wait to see if it's confirmed positive. But all of us are looking for Minnesota to continue their win streak after upsetting the Green Bay Packers last week. Why are you guys taking Minnesota this week?
So when I first made this pick, I made it Detroit, and then I saw the Matthew Stafford situation unfold, and I switched it to Minnesota. I'm not confident in picking Minnesota, and it's good to talk about Stafford and realize he is just a high risk of being exposed to somebody with COVID. So he's got the whole 5-day protocol. The exposure happened on Monday. He'll be able to get back in the building and play on Sunday, but with no practice all week, which is a little concerning. But he's a veteran quarterback, so it's not that big of a deal. But I think not having Galladay is a big loss. Marvin Jones could be a pretty good fill-in. He's been shown to have some good weeks with Galladay, but without even more. And TJ Hawkinson could get a big boost. But Minnesota is at least a little bit more put together. There's not as many question marks. You could see a big Justin Jefferson game this week. That's why I'm picking Minnesota.
In all honesty, I don't think it would have been as close even with Matt Stafford there. I'm taking Minnesota easily. And if you're a betting person, bet that 4 point line. I would say Minnesota to win by more than four is a relatively safe bet, especially with Galladay and Matt Stafford out. I would hammer that bet. Um, Minnesota is just the better team. The Lions every year is a team that we look at and say, they might have it this year. They have the talent. They might do it this year. And every year they disappoint. I would attribute them, if you want to compare to baseball, I would say they are the Los Angeles Angels of the NFL. It's a team that every year you look at and you're like, wow, Mike Trout, Albert Pujols, now they got Anthony Rendon. This is a good team. And they suck. And they're terrible. And it doesn't make any sense. And I think it's only going to continue. And now those big guys are out. Minnesota's going to win handedly, in my opinion.
Well, I don't know if handedly would be the way I'd go with it, but I do think Minnesota is going to win this game. One thing I'm looking forward to is Adrian Peterson's return to Minnesota. He has not looked great. None of the Detroit Lions running backs have looked great, but we've seen in the past how well Adrian Peterson has run there. Maybe it's his swan song. Maybe he goes out with a bang and gets it to a close game. But I agree. I think Minnesota, Dalvin Cook coming back from injury, we saw last week how important he is to this offense, and I think they squeak out a victory.
All right, well, there you have it for that matchup. So let's go ahead and move on to another one. We talked about Adrian Peterson and his return. Well, let's talk about another running back return. We might be seeing the return of Christian McCaffrey, and the Carolina Panthers are facing the Kansas City Chiefs. Carolina is currently 10.5 point underdogs. What do you guys expect from CMC's potential return?
I'm going to go out there and say I think it's not going to be as great as people expect. I do think he will get better as the season goes on, but he's missed a good portion of time. I wouldn't even be surprised if it's not announced from the team, but if he's held to some sort of snap count. I could be wrong. He could go off for a big game. But I do think Mike Davis will continue to have a role at least the next few weeks. And I think the Kansas City Chiefs are going to put up points. So maybe that favors McCaffrey catching the ball, but I think this game leans more towards a shootout. So I don't have big expectations for CMC returning this week.
I would have to agree with you a little bit, Cody. I would say that I believe since Kansas City is a team that we would expect to beat Carolina relatively easily, Carolina would probably expect that this is most likely a loss coming in. I mean, they would never admit it. I think with that being said, they probably want to take it easy on McCaffrey, not throw him right into the fire right away, and they'll just wait till next week to really unleash him.
See, I think because you're going against such a high-powered team in Kansas City, and I don't think this team's going to fold up. I think this team still does have some aspirations for the playoffs, and every win becomes more important. So they're going to try to hang into this game. And because they are going against a team that all they do is score, you're going to want to use your best players. I still think you're going to see some Mike Davis, but I think Christian McCaffrey is actually going to have a big game coming back. And I'm even going to go ahead and throw a bold prediction on it. And I'm going to say that Christian McCaffrey gets 150 all-purpose yards and 2 touchdowns, but the Chiefs are still going to win.
That's bold, George, especially because I said I think he's going to be on a snap count. And if you're out there playing fantasy, hold your expectations because George, like myself, has not gotten a single bold prediction right, so he might have just jinxed it. But I think we're all agreeing that Kansas City will win this game. It should still be a fun matchup between those two offenses, but the defense for Carolina just can't keep up. So we can move on to our next matchup with the Houston Texans at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville is 6.5-point underdogs. Gardner Minshew is out with a thumb injury that he's had for weeks without telling the team, which is a whole different conversation on how that even works. And I don't know why we keep doing it, but we once again are all picking the same team with the Houston Texans. Tell me about it, guys.
Yeah, not only am I picking the Houston Texans in this matchup, but I also believe that if you are in desperate need for a defensive stream this week, which most people are, Houston's defense is available in almost every league, and they are a great play this week. So feel free to pick them up and start them this week. I don't think that Luton is really going to light the world on fire and blow out Houston at all. I could expect this to still be a relatively low scoring game. I'm curious to see what Will Fuller is going to do after not being traded. It's got to be a little frustrating hearing that your team is shopping you, and then when you don't get moved, it's got to be awkward coming back to that locker room.
I'm going to temper expectations on the Houston defense for a second here because I've thought about them as a stream play, even because of the backup quarterback and everything. But their defense in every matchup this year has scored negative more than any other team, and their max points in a week was 3. And I just think like they're so mediocre or bad that even in a good matchup, I don't think I want to touch them.
You make some great points there, George, but there's always the time for a defense to break out, and it definitely could be this week. And I can confirm that Luton does not have a mullet, so he's not gonna ball out like Gardner Minshew would.
Does he have
Yeah,
sideburns or something? I feel like there has to be some sort of facial hair involved in this.
no, he has your casual every young quarterback haircut, short on the sides, a little flick on the top. But that's too much hair talk for this podcast. But I want to go back to Will Fuller, and I completely agree, Tyler, on how is Will Fuller going to come out in this game. I know he tweeted out the meme of like the kid sitting and tapping his fingers, just waiting. With about 2 hours left on the trade deadline, made Packers Twitter go crazy. But that's besides the point. And I just think the guy was ready to move on. I don't think he's in their long-term futures as his contract expires. So as a Will Fuller owner, I'm a little nervous that his production might drop because he just doesn't care. I'm hoping it's not the case and he balls out to try to get an even bigger contract.
In all honesty, wouldn't you be ready to move on as well? I mean, you watched your team sell off pretty much everybody good on the team except Deshaun Watson, and now you're just playing losing football. I mean, I really don't like the guy. He's one of my least favorite guys in the NFL, but JJ Watt has been a big piece for that team for years. And even he is just frustrated and tired of being there. I was surprised he wasn't shipped also. It can't be fun playing losing football, especially when it seems like your team doesn't want to win in the first place. And as we said in our podcast yesterday, in our week 8 breakdown, they also don't have any future. They don't have any picks. I mean, their first round pick and second round pick both went to Miami. So not only are they doing terrible this year, but they have nothing to build off of next year. If I was Will Fuller, I'd be ready to run away from that team. So I can't really say I blame him.
I definitely don't blame him either, and I don't know if it's going to completely affect his output, but it definitely could, and I think that's good news for Brandon Cooks owners in fantasy. Wouldn't start him right away. He's probably still matchup based, but he could end up being a good long term option as he's really starting to come and bring it together.
George, you've been on that Brandon Cooks hype train all season long, but I tend to agree that Brandon Cooks is getting more and more looks and could be eating into Fuller's snaps. I think, Tyler, you make a great point. I think everybody is done in Jacksonville, and I wouldn't even be surprised if Watson is done in Houston. I'm sorry, I think I said Jacksonville a couple seconds ago, but Houston, I wouldn't be surprised if Watson, you start hearing rumblings, maybe he even wants out because of how bad the situation has turned. But let's move on to some teams that are in a little bit better situations, competing for playoff spots, with the Baltimore Ravens coming off a close loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts are 2.5-point underdogs. I know us on this podcast have not been big believers in the Colts all season. It shows this week in our game picks as we all once again are picking the same team in the Baltimore Ravens. Does the COVID scare after Marlon Humphrey tested positive scare you guys at all, or do you think they'll be back in time? So Baltimore all the way.
I mean, I think the only player they're going to end up missing is Marlon Humphrey. He's probably going to have to miss a week because he's the one that tested positive, and that's a big loss. I mean, he's probably the new Peanut Tillman. If you ask any NFL announcer or analyst out there, he's probably part of what makes that defense run. But Indianapolis doesn't impress me. They're still good outside of him, so that's why I'm not worried about this game. And it's scary, but I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Baltimore players that were deemed to be close contact players, and they should all be back. I mean, we saw with the Raiders a few weeks ago when the entire offensive line was put on the COVID list. They were still back for the game, but the issue is they can't practice. Now, I think that Baltimore is such a well-coached team and such a well-disciplined team that they could probably afford a week without practice and still win um, just fine. So I don't expect too much of a fall off from Baltimore this week, even without Humphrey. Phillip Rivers isn't a guy that defenses are really shaking when they have to play anyway. So, yeah, I still think Baltimore is going to win this game.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to put out one more thing. I did see that Jonathan Taylor is dealing with a mild ankle injury, so he'll probably still play this week. That backfield has not been the best. It's been a little all season long, and it looks to continue this week. And even with the Ravens defense missing so many practices, I don't think they'll have much success running on that team. So just be aware of Jonathan Taylor. But if you're playing fantasy, I do think he has such a good stretch, especially in the playoffs, that I would hold on to him, maybe even try to get him on the cheap side if you can. But this might not be his week.
So why don't we move on then to a game that we might actually be picking differently here. Good matchup here, NFC versus AFC. It's the Seattle Seahawks at the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are 2.5-point underdogs. Where are you guys going with this game?
I'm going to go with Seattle in this matchup. It's going to be hard for me to pick against Seattle in any matchup all season long. If we're being honest, I think they're one of my Super Bowl favorites at this point. They're one of the most well-rounded teams. I think their defense has taken a huge step forward. Their offense looks dynamic. They are frustrating fantasy-wise because you never know if DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett is going to be the guy to go off. It seems like it's always one, not both, which is very frustrating. If both guys were getting 15 a week rather than one getting 30 while the other gets 2, it'd be a lot better fantasy-wise. But anyway, yes, I'm going to go with Seattle in this one. If you are a Josh Allen owner, I still wouldn't freak out. I know he's not putting up the points that he did earlier in the season, but I do still think he's a very viable quarterback one. But my real question is, how confident do you guys feel playing Zach Moss moving forward?
I really like Zach Moss. I mean, if you listen to us in our midseason breakdown, I think he's starting to get more carries and he needs to start taking over that backfield. He's been by far more productive than Devin Singletary, as much as I love Devin Singletary. I think Zach Moss is the future. I think you can still get him on the waiver wire in some places. If not, you can get him really cheap. I would try to get some shares of him. Hold on maybe for a week or two if you can, and then you can see you can probably play him pretty confidently.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that. I think Zach Moss has a bright future. I'm not playing him this week with confidence. I still think there's too much backfield split between Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. I think you're just guessing on who gets the touchdowns. Last week, Moss got him. He could definitely get him again this week, or Singletary can get him, or even Josh Allen can get him. So as long as Allen is running, the running backs in Buffalo scare me a little bit. But speaking of Allen's running, I think Allen has his bounce back game this week. I think Seattle's defense is terrible. They're going to be their Achilles heel if they don't make the Super Bowl or even a deep playoff run. Is because they're going to get into a shootout and their defense won't be able to make a stop. So I'm playing Josh Allen this week. Even maybe in daily fantasy, his value might have dropped some because of the last couple of weeks. I think you're playing Diggs. I think you're playing John Brown. I think anyone on the Bills outside of the running backs are a must start. Maybe not Cole Beasley, but and to that point, I say it a lot, but Seattle is a West Coast team coming to the East Coast at 1:00.
Here we go.
We
There it is.
we
I'm
saw it
ready.
earlier in the season when they came to Miami, how slow they looked, how close Miami made that game. I think Buffalo is better than Miami. I think Buffalo needs that bounce back game, and I think it'll be this week. And I think the defense of Buffalo will even slow down the Seattle Seahawks offense a little bit. And that's why I'm going to put my bold prediction out there that this will not be a DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett week. I think both wide receivers will struggle. Neither of them will cross the 100-yard mark. It's just not going to be a great game for Seattle. I like Buffalo a lot in this one.
I totally agree with your West Coast teams traveling east thing most of the time. But actually, during that Seattle Miami game, I saw a stat come up that said Seattle is actually 8-0 in the last 2 years traveling east for 1:00. And now they're 9-0 because they won that Miami game. So I think you're picking the wrong team traveling east when you're doing this. I would beware, but that's a very bold prediction, Cody.
Wow, I like the random stats being thrown down there. That's cool.
Yeah, and you can't win them all, so you're going to lose one eventually. And I think the Seattle Seahawks will lose one this week. Let's go to another matchup where we're split on the final 1:00 game. The Denver Broncos at the Atlanta Falcons. Guys, I'm going to go with Denver in this one. They came off a close win against the Los Angeles Chargers last week. I am probably the most down on the Atlanta Falcons team out of the three of us. I think Drew Lock is continuing to progress. I think Atlanta is pretty much done for this season. Atlanta did have the 10 days since playing on Thursday, but I think Denver still finds a way to get it done.
I'm going to agree with you, Cody, and go with Denver. I'm not as far down on Atlanta as you are, and not as high on them as Tyler is. But Denver, I think, is coming around. They're underrated. KJ Hamler is really starting to find his niche in that offense now that he's back from injury, has some time under his belt. He got a game-winning touchdown last week. I think him being paired with Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick makes that passing attack very multi-dimensional and hard to defend. I like that they're giving Philip Lindsay the ball more. So Atlanta can score points. I think Denver's defense isn't quite good enough to completely hold them down, but maybe slow them down just enough that Denver can put up enough points to win this game.
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and disagree with you guys. I am going with Atlanta. And yeah, I kind of am on the Atlanta train this year, which sounds ridiculous since they only have 2 wins, but they're in every game. It's very rare that you see Atlanta just get completely blown out and never competitive in the game. They have such a good offense that whenever you have an offense like that, you're going to be in every game. They have Matt Ryan, former MVP. They have Todd Gurley. They have Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones. Hopefully, Ridley does play this week. We do have to monitor that. He is hopeful he'll be able to play. If he doesn't play this week, I highly expect him to play next week. But even so, if he doesn't play, we saw when Julio was out earlier in the season, Russell Gage stepped up. He was fine. Olamide Zaccheaus, he did fine in as a replacement. So I think that Atlanta is going to be able to put up enough points that if they can just stop themselves from blowing the game late, I think they're going to hold on and win this one. And I'm actually surprised that you both are going against Atlanta with Atlanta favored in this one.
Yeah, it's mainly the Calvin Ridley injury. I don't think he'll be back this week. Um, but I do also want to point out that Denver is another. This could be COVID watch game 2.0, as Denver is now dealing with some COVID issues. It started with John Elway, and now they had to cancel practice again Wednesday after another infection. So if Denver can't practice, this game could be possibly postponed, moved, just to keep an eye on that. But I don't think Ridley plays, and I think if Ridley gets ruled out, that line will get a lot closer, and I think Denver has what it takes to win the game.
One more thing here, quick, before we move on. So, Cody, we just talked West Coast teams going east. Does Mountain Time teams going east for 1 o'clock count too?
It's not as big of a deal. They're not as far. They're not as many hours behind. It's not as the stat doesn't stick out as much as true West Coast teams going east, but it is something to watch.
So, guys, I do have one more question for you before we move on to the 4 o'clock games. For all of our fantasy listeners out there, there's one frustrating thing with Denver that is really bothering fantasy owners right now, and that is who to play, Philip Lindsay or Melvin Gordon. Who can you trust? Can you trust either one of them? Would you start either of them? Would you start both of them? Who do you guys trust more moving forward?
I actually think the answer is like you got to play both, but I don't trust both. Like I know that you don't listen to the show for like answers like that, so I'm sorry, listeners. But if I had to pick one, it'd be Lindsay. But the team seems to want to keep Melvin Gordon involved. They throw to him, so I think he has to be in your lineup. And unless you somehow got all the good waiver running backs, then definitely take him out. I don't love either of them, but if I had to choose, I'd go Lindsay.
I think for right now, the answer has to be Melvin Gordon for me. Melvin Gordon had 8 carries and 7 targets in their last game. Lindsay had 6 carries and 3 targets. So it's just favoring Melvin Gordon a little bit right now. So, I mean, I think in the long run, if it evens out even to 50-50, the answer is going to be Philip Lindsay because Philip Lindsay is just so much more explosive of a player. But for right now, it's got to be Melvin Gordon for me.
All right, well, there you have it, guys. So let's go ahead and move on to our 4 o'clock games then. And we have the Las Vegas Raiders traveling to the Los Angeles Chargers. The Raiders are 1 point underdogs. Who do you guys have in this matchup?
So for this matchup, I'm going to take the Las Vegas Raiders, but I think it's going to be close, and this could sneakily be the best matchup of the week. I the Chargers team is just fun to watch, but they can't finish. That's the reason I'm picking the Raiders. But I talked about it a few weeks ago when they played the Jacksonville Jaguars. They weren't great teams, but I was really excited for the matchup, and I feel the same way about this matchup. I think Ruggs will have a big play. I think Keenan Allen will continue to go off. Mike Williams will probably get involved. I don't know what Chargers running back to play, so probably don't play any of them. I look for Josh Jacobs to bounce back. I think a lot of points will be scored. It'll be a back and forth affair. But as we've seen multiple times this season, the Chargers just can't finish in the fourth quarter. So give me the Raiders.
Yeah, ever since Justin Herbert took over as the starting quarterback, I think the Chargers have quickly become one of those teams that I don't ever want to see my favorite team go against. I think that they are a tough team. I think that they have a potential to win every single game, no matter who they're facing. But just like Cody mentioned, they know how to lose. They're really good at it. They take leads early on in the game and blow them in the fourth quarter. They are the Atlanta Falcons 2.0, and we're not talking about it as much as we should. I think because of that reason, with the Raiders being in so many games just as well, and being better at closing out games than the Chargers are, I'm actually going to go with the Raiders to win this one as well. So we're both taking the upset. I do think the Chargers are the better team in this matchup, but I think the Raiders are going to pull off the win.
I am going to actually go with the Chargers then, and the one person taking the favorite. Again, this is weird, but
You're also a closet Chargers fan.
that's
That's
not
true.
the point. Not the point. You're completely right about Herbert completely changing this offense. He always gets them out to big leads, and then you have to worry about it in the end of the game with them coming back and losing it. I think I don't know if the Vegas offense is insane enough for me to be too worried about them coming back in the fourth quarter. I feel like the Chargers eventually have to learn from their mistakes of taking the foot off the pedal. I like the Chargers' depth. It's frustrating for fantasy, but it's hard to defend, and that's why they're having the success. So just give me the Chargers. I'll take the favorite alone. That's fine.
I'm also excited to see who replaces Desmond King as the kick returner, punt returner. Special teams is often considered a lost art in the NFL with all the touchbacks and fair catches and the punters being so good. But, Desmond Howard was, or not Desmond Howard, that was a big slip. Desmond King was definitely an electric returner. So I'm excited to see who the Chargers put back there.
I hope it's Jalen Guyton.
But
I really do. Jalen Guyton is one of their speediest guys on the team, and he is so exciting to watch as a receiver. I obviously don't know how good he is at special teams, but I hope he's the one they put back there. I think it could be fun to watch.
I agree with that, but it's probably going to be that Troy Pope that no one knew who existed and they started last week at running back.
Yeah, we could see it. It'll be somebody else we've never heard of, I'm sure.
speaking of people you never heard of, let's move into our next matchup, and we'll talk about the Dallas Cowboys and quarterbacks because they're going to play people we never heard of. It's still up in the air on who they start between Cooper Rush and Blake. I can't remember his first name, but he played in the XFL. They're taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. They did not look good last week with DiNucci. I'm not surprised they're moving on, but I don't really see a way Dallas wins this game. Like, Pittsburgh's going to have to really mess up.
You almost slipped Cooper Kupp out of your mouth there, and I think Cooper Kupp would be a better option at quarterback than anybody that they have a chance to start.
Garrett Gilbert is the quarterback that they are talking about starting, the XFL player that you were mentioning. It is, Garrett Gilbert as the potential
See, his
starting
name
quarterback.
isn't even Blake. I
It's
said
not.
it's Blake something, and it's not even Blake. That's how bad it is.
Whoever starts at quarterback isn't worth mentioning. Their name doesn't even matter. It's that bad right now over there in Dallas. And, because of that, I think it's pretty safe to say we're all going to pick Pittsburgh in this matchup. I mean, this could be the biggest trap game ever, but I just don't see it happening. I don't see the Cowboys winning this game at all. I think it's going to be an ugly, ugly game, which is why I am going to go ahead and throw my bold prediction on this game, and that is Pittsburgh to break 50 points and the Cowboys to fail to break 10 points. Single digits for the Cowboys, over 50 for Pittsburgh.
I like it. A one-sided
Wow.
affair. It's pretty bold. You'd think if it's like 30-10, Pittsburgh just pulls their starters, but hell, their backups might be able to score 20 points on this defense. But I'm going to ask you guys a fun question. Who scores more points in this game, the Cowboys offense or the Pittsburgh's defense?
Pittsburgh's defense. Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to say because we saw the 4 turnovers by Lamar Jackson last week, and Lamar Jackson's a better quarterback than whoever the Cowboys throw out there, and he had 4 turnovers. So I think Pittsburgh's defense is just going to eat. I think they're going to have plenty of defensive touchdowns, and it's going to help contribute to the 50 points they're going to put up.
I mean, I agree. It's got to be Pittsburgh's defense. I don't have any confidence in the Cowboys putting up points. Honestly feel like the Steelers defense could get one touchdown and outscore the Cowboys offense at this point.
Yeah, I tend to agree with both of you guys. That's enough of that game. Let's move on to a more exciting game with the Miami Dolphins at the Arizona Cardinals. Tua takes us on his second start against Kyler Murray. We're actually split on this one. I'm going to go ahead and say I'm with Arizona. I think Kyler Murray is a sneaky MVP candidate. I like what they're doing. I do think they'll miss Kenyon Drake a little bit. I'm not sure Chase Edmonds is ready for a full-time role, but he's looked good enough, so he'll probably prove me wrong and go out there and make them not even want Kenyon Drake back. But I just don't. I think Miami's defense is really good. I think it'll be a close game, but I'm going to go with Arizona at home in this one.
I think we have to continue to keep tampering expectations on Tua. I was right, and he didn't do well last week, but their defense and special teams carried him to a win. I'm not saying he's going to do that bad this week. He definitely should do better, but I don't see their defense and special teams repeating that performance against Arizona. They're a better offense than the Rams, and even just keeping that up in general in the NFL is not, not feasible. But Tua is going to have growing pains. He doesn't look like he could be as polished of a quarterback as even a Justin Herbert or a Joe Burrow could be. I don't think I can pick him against a good team like Arizona yet.
You said that we had to tamper our expectations against Tua, but I think you have to do the same thing against Arizona. I mean, we've seen Arizona in games, we've seen them competitive, we've seen them have some good games, but we've all been burned in the past. Whenever there's a game that we all think Arizona's going to win it, they seem to let us down. They either lose it or they make it real close and have us sweating. And that's why I'm actually not going to have us all pick Arizona, and I am going to pick Miami in this one. It looked to me like Tua was more like playing with nerves rather than just making poor decisions. He had a lot of pressure on him. I mean, everybody talked about was it too early to bench Fitzpatrick. You have the Dolphins actually winning games right now, so he is in a playoff hunt. He was one of the top quarterbacks taken. So there's so much pressure on him. It looked like he played with nerves, and he was still able to get the win despite that because of his defense carrying him. I think he puts those nerves aside going into this week, and I think he really surprises us and pulls out the win against Arizona.
I wouldn't hate it at all. I got a quick, I'm going to go back to the streaming defenses, and I'm going to ask George since you're picking Arizona as well. Um, Arizona is another defense that is probably on your waiver wires with the Houston's, the Washington football team. What out of those three, which one do you like the best?
I probably like Washington's the best, and then Arizona's. I actually have a share or two of Arizona in a couple of leagues because I don't hate the matchup. Defenses are just so tough this year to find.
Absolutely, and hopefully you're not going to get against the guy that has the Pittsburgh defense because he's
Yikes.
about to get 30 points,
Yes.
and that's not going to be a fun one. But you know what is going to be a fun one? The Sunday night matchup. The New Orleans Saints at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Saints are 5-point underdogs. Guys, that's going to be a fun one. It hates me to pick Tom Brady, but I think Tom Brady's going to win this game. I think, and I'm hoping Michael Thomas plays because I want to see this. I'm hoping Michael Thomas plays. I'm hoping Chris Godwin plays. I want to see both these teams at full strength. I'm not worried about the Monday night close game with the Giants. I think Tampa Bay might even have been looking a little too far ahead at this matchup. I think they get the revenge for their week 1 loss.
Is this the oldest average age of starting quarterbacks in a matchup ever?
It's got to be close if it's not.
It's what, 43 versus 41, I think.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think you're
42
right.
average. It'd have to be close.
I don't think anyone's actually said that yet, but I just thought of that. I'm like, wow, that's insane.
Breaking news here on the Couch GMs podcast. Oldest quarterback average on the Sunday night game.
But anyway, I'm with Cody. I'm picking Tampa Bay. I would love to see everybody come in at full strength because this could end up being a this kind of being a playoff game later, and it'd be awesome to get that preview. The Sunday night games in these, with these good matchups on Sunday night, you normally don't disappoint either. You get some high scoring, close, entertaining games. I think we could see that again. But interesting thing in fantasy before I pass this off to Tyler, his boy Taysom Hill is projected 14 plus points in fantasy right now. Why?
Because NFL fantasy has no idea what they're doing when it comes to projections. There's no reason that Taysom Hill should be projected that much. Let's get real. I feel like you guys are almost just throwing Taysom Hill into the podcast, just like, hey, let's see if we can make Tyler angry. Taysom Hill, that's working.
Maybe.
Maybe.
It's working. But guys, I am actually going to go with Taysom Hill's team, and I'm going to pick the Saints in this matchup. Week 1, we saw the Saints basically without Michael Thomas. He only had 3 catches for 17 yards. He was injured early. He was a non-factor in the game, and Tampa Bay did have Chris Godwin. He was their leading receiver, and now with the potential of both of them being out or both of them playing, either way, the Saints still dominated that game. They won 34-23. Tom Brady looked lost, so I don't see any reason why it should flip so dramatically and we can pick Tampa Bay now. Now, I understand that Drew Brees doesn't look as good as he did in years past, but at the same time, he didn't look that great in week 1 and they still dominated that game. I believe that the Saints are going to do the same thing. I don't think it's going to be as one sided as week 1 was. I do think it's going to be closer, but I'm going to stick with the Saints in this one, guys.
Taysom Hill over under half a touchdown.
Under.
Cool. I'll take the over just because it's Taysom Hill, but I do want to point out this will be Antonio Brown's return game. Do you guys think he'll do anything relative? Do you think he makes a big play? Like, what are your thoughts on Antonio Brown returning to action after all his time off?
They were kind of speaking in code on he's going to be active and he's going to have a role in the offense. It could be 20 plays, it could be 60. I think it could be 10. He hasn't played in almost a year and a half. He is not exactly young anymore either. I don't know. Like his return has just been giving me nightmares that related to what happened with Josh Gordon 7 times. Everyone picks him up hoping that he would give him a big run in fantasy. Everyone's like, oh, the Seahawks have him now. They're going to run at the Super Bowl. And he was very not impactful. I think his name just carries so much value at this point, but he's not going to have a big impact this week, or I don't think he's going to have a big impact going forward. It's going to still be Mike Evans and Chris Godwin's team.
So, my take on this, we've seen Tom Brady force the ball to certain players in the red zone this season. Most of the time, it's Mike Evans. I almost said Chris Evans. It's almost Captain America. Most of the time, it's Mike
That'd be
Evans,
so cool.
right? No, Captain America can't play with Tom Brady. That would just ruin him.
Oh,
Anyway,
I agree. That's not cool at
Mike
all. Not
Evans
cool at
is
all.
usually the guy that gets the targets in the red zone. If it's not him, it's usually Gronk. Now, I think that in this game, Antonio Brown is currently living with Tom Brady. Tom Brady has been the biggest advocate of Antonio Brown over the past year on the
Oh, they're doing it
Patriots
again?
and on Tampa Bay. Yeah, he's living there again. Um,
Wow.
so I have to say, I think I agree with George in the sense that I think he might only play 10 snaps in the game, with it being his first game back after a while. But I also think that Tom Brady is going to try to force the ball to Antonio Brown in the red zone at least one time. I think he's going to try so hard to get Antonio Brown a touchdown. I don't think he's a huge fantasy asset this week. He might be moving forward. I still don't see it. Too many pieces in that offense. Uh, but I do think Antonio Brown gets a touchdown this week.
I like it. And one other thing to point out, though, if New Orleans and Tyler is correct in this matchup, could get the season sweep on the Tampa Bay. That would go a long way for off seeding and potentially hosting a home playoff game. But that's enough for Sunday night football. So let's move to the other Monday night game. Not the other Monday night game, the other night game, which is on Monday, with the New England Patriots at the New York Jets. The Jets are only 7-point underdogs, so that's probably a win for the Jets. But I'm taking New England. We say it all the time. The Jets suck. I don't got much else to say about the Jets. I look for Cam Newton to bounce back a little bit, but besides that,
Picking
Jets
New
suck.
England. Jets stink. But y'all were so worried last week about 3 NFC East teams were active and they all got primetime games. I bet you'd be begging for the NFC East when you're watching this game. This game's going to be awful.
No, I'm not going to be begging for NFC East. I watched that Eagles versus Cowboys game, and that was one of the worst NFL games I've ever watched in my entire life. At least, the Jets played the Bengals earlier this season, and that was an awful game, but it still had some interesting factors to it. When you have two bad teams facing off against each other, there's usually something good with it, but that Eagles Cowboys game had nothing good to watch. Ben DiNucci was terrible. The Eagles should have been blowing out the Cowboys with how bad they've looked, and yet they still didn't. They still looked terrible. Um, I have to disagree with you there. I'm not going to be begging for it.
Yeah, I'm not begging for an NFC East matchup either. But I want to talk a little fantasy real quick. One guy I in a deeper league, maybe daily fantasy, a guy to at least look at this week if you're in a pinch with bye weeks would be Jacoby Myers from the New England Patriots. He has seemed to become the number one target there for Cam Newton. He's looked better and better as Cam has looked better and better, if you want to say he's getting less turnovers. But in this poor matchup against that terrible Jets defense, he's a guy I might try to slide in to DFS or even in deep leagues or even if I need a guy in a pinch.
Yeah, I think he's definitely an interesting name. Another interesting name that, you'll never feel comfortable starting, but he is a good player, would have to be Demir Bird. He's actually performed fairly well this season. He's gotten quite a few targets. He's averaging four or more targets a game. He had some big games early on in the season, but he's still getting plenty of targets currently in the season. And against the Jets, terrible secondary. I think he's another guy that in DFS only could be a nice sneaky starter. But talking about sneaky Patriots starters, there's a guy that I had a lot of faith in a few weeks ago, and I actually seen Cody in a deep league, a 14-team league, drop him, and that is Damian Harris. And now you dropped him, and he ended up having a big week. Do you regret the decision? Do you still think he is not going to do anything? Or tell me about Damian Harris.
Uh, regret the decision? No. Did I want to do it? No. I just happened to have, like you said, a 14 team league and a bunch of buys and players out, and I needed a roster spot and I couldn't drop anyone that was on buy. Um, I was going to try to get him back with Fab, but I'm not going to lie, I forgot to put in my waiver request in that league, which you should never do. Make sure you're always paying attention to your fantasy teams. But I was a big fan of Damian Harris at the draft. I was drafting him, in your last round and putting him in your IR spot. I think he has a bright future. The only thing that does scare me about Damian Harris is Cam Newton's running ability at the goal line. I think Cam Newton definitely steals some touchdowns. That's my only reservation with Damian Harris.
I would say that if you have Damian Harris, you saw his big week last week, I would be a little weary about playing him this week. Um, I know the Jets are a terrible team. I say it every week that they are going to go 0-16, and I'm not going to change that until they finally win a game, which won't happen. However, the Jets, if they do have anything good going for them, it's that defensive line against the run. We last week we saw Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Le'Veon Bell each only get 6 carries, and neither one of them impressed us. They both look terrible. They both failed to do anything with their carries, and I don't think that it's going to be that much different this week. Be careful starting running backs against the Jets defense.
That's also a great point, Tyler. I think that wraps up our picks and predictions for this week. Always do. They'll be up on our social media, so please comment, tell us why we should have picked your favorite team, who we got right, who we got wrong. But before we go, it was the trade deadline week. It wasn't very active, but I still want to debate a little bit which trade will have the biggest impact rest of season into next season. And George, I want to start with you because you didn't pick a deadline trade. You picked a trade that happened a few days prior to the deadline, but I think it could be a good one.
I picked Carlos Dunlap going to the Seattle Seahawks. There wasn't a lot going on at the trade deadline, so I felt like I had to just pick whatever trade I thought would have the most impact. I'm not really super impressed with Carlos Dunlap. Don't get me wrong there, but the Seahawks defense was awful. They needed something to help them out, and I think he actually helps out the people around him more than he himself will have an impact, specifically Jerron Reed. We have not seen Jerron Reed have a fantastic season. He's the defensive tackle, former Pro Bowler, I believe, for the Seahawks. He had a monster season 2 years ago, disappeared off the radar since. I think having something else for offensive lines to look at will help him out with stopping the run, getting back to the passer again. So that's why I think that is going to be the biggest impact. And that Seahawks defense getting a boost makes them even more of a scary team.
Wow, that's some great insight there, George. I'm actually going to jump into my trade, which I am going to go with. Yeah, call me a homer. That's all right. Desmond King to the Titans. I mean, look,
Oh, you homer.
I am a homer, but honestly, I do think that this is the best trade of the deadline, mainly because the Titans are still a very good team. They're still a dangerous offense. They are a playoff hopeful. They should win the AFC South. I don't have any fear from the Indianapolis Colts. Um, but the only thing that they had lacking was secondary. Now they've been missing their number one corner, Adoree Jackson, all season. He's supposed to be back. He'll replace Jonathan Joseph on the outside. The other thing we don't have is a slot corner, and that's exactly what Desmond King plays. He is a former All-Pro returner and corner. So I think him stepping in into the slot is going to really help shore up this defense along with Adoree Jackson. And if our biggest weakness was secondary and you trade for secondary and you give up pennies for it, I mean, we only gave up a sixth round pick. It's hard to argue that this is not the best trade of the deadline. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Desmond King. I think it's going to really help the Titans propel them forward, and they could be a scary team moving forward.
When the trade happened, I told you that was a great steal for the Titans. I love Desmond King there. So I don't blame you for picking that one at all. And I'm going to do a little bit of being a homer myself, and people are going to be like, what? The Packers didn't make a trade. Well, that's the issue. Now, we saw the Seahawks, they're a contender. They went out and got Carlos Dunlap. We saw the Saints, contender. They went out and got Quan Alexander. We saw the Bucks. It wasn't a trade, but they went out and got Antonio Brown. The Packers are off to a great start. They're in the window to compete. Now, I completely understand not giving up a second-round pick for Will Fuller. It's not worth running a guy for 8 games for a second-round pick. I completely understand. But not taking the Carlos Dunlap route or the Desmond King route, a fifth or a sixth, a fifth to Denver for Shelby Harris. Now, I understand it takes 2 to tango, but make a move. Make it at least appear that you want to win now. I'm not asking, to make a huge blockbuster trade. Like I said, I completely understand not trading a second round pick for Will Fuller. As much as I would have loved Will Fuller on our team, I think it would have made our team better. I understand saving that second round pick. But there had to be guys, and we've seen it with guys that are being waived after the trade deadline that you're not going to get because your waiver priority is too low. You should have definitely went out there and made at least one move to, I think it should have been against on the defensive line to give Kenny Clark some help, almost like Carlos Dunlap is for Jaron Reed. So I definitely think the Packers not trading is going to be the biggest impact and could cause them to miss out on their goals this season.
So, Cody, one player that I did see get released after the trade deadline that I know the Packers were eyeing up in the draft was Dante Pettis, the receiver from the 49ers. Do you think the Packers would go out and get him? Do you think he would help the team out?
Dante Pettis is a very interesting name. As everyone knows, Matt LaFleur's brother is the offensive pass coordinator, I believe, or he's an offensive coach for the 49ers. He has an inside connection, and with as many injuries as the 49ers have, for Dante Pettis just to be waived, that's not a great look for him. I do believe Pettis was actually claimed today by the Giants, so we'll never actually find out if the Packers even put in a request. But I do think that something like that may make up for not trading. Vic Beasley hasn't looked great, but maybe the Packers sign him after. Don't even claim on waivers, and they can sign him to a vet minimum deal. Maybe they can somehow convince Snacks Harrison to sign to their active roster instead of sitting on the Seahawks practice squad. Probably won't happen, but I still think the Packers need to find a way to get at least one or two. They don't have to be blockbuster, but solid veterans on that defense. I think also a little bit off topic, but you can see the Packers defense is definitely used to using the crowd energy to drive them, and you can see the lack of crowds has caused them to come out flat. Their key players don't seem to have that same juice as they had a season ago. Could be injuries, but it's probably just the 2020 season. Um, I would have loved to have seen Dante Pettis give us a shot. I mean, we also let go of Travis Fulgham. Now, granted, he was only in our camp for a few days this offseason, and we had a lot of guys in front of him, so I completely understand it. But just something to look out for is the Packers need to add at least 1 or 2 more pieces, in my opinion, and I think they missed out on a big opportunity at the trade deadline.
So then, real quick before we finish this podcast up, uh, Cody, you talk about how the Packers should have made a move and they did not, and you think that's going to really hurt them. Another team that did not make a move is the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I understand the Philadelphia Eagles do not look like a great team. They don't look like a playoff caliber team to the level of the Green Bay Packers. However, they are leading their division. They are the favorites to win that division. So whether they like it or not, whether they're ready for it or not, it does look like the Eagles are going to be going to the playoffs this season, barring any crazy things happening in that division. So, George, are you disappointed at all that the Eagles didn't try to go out and get somebody?
No, I'm actually disappointed they didn't trade away any of the veteran pieces that they have there that they won't need, like an Alshon Jeffrey. I know it was hard to because he was hurt. Will Parks, a safety, he was on the trade block. A couple other defensive players that are not exactly young or could not be in the future. I'm not mad that they didn't trade for anybody because I know even if they make the playoffs, they're not going to have any impact this year. I'm mad they didn't trade anybody away.
Yeah, George, I think that's a great point to point out. I was a little surprised too that the Eagles didn't become sellers. Maybe they're going to try to go all in with the team that they have, even though it doesn't look great for them. But that's probably about it for this week's episode. So thanks again for listening to this episode of the Couch GMs podcast. You can follow us on all our social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at the Couch GMs. Please leave a comment and a 5-star review for whatever podcast app you're listening to. And we just enjoy doing the show for you guys.
Yeah, guys, please get involved to the Couch GMs podcast. There is a little bit of Couch GMs in all of us. Look, we've all been there. We've all been sitting on the couch, looking at the moves that your team is making and screaming at your phone, screaming at your computer saying, why didn't they do this? Why did they do that? What are you doing? I would have done this. I would have done that. That's the inner Couch GM in you. Let it out. Get involved with our podcast. And, ask us some questions. Tell us your picks, suggest some punishments, even talk some trash. We could take it, but we'll dish it. Make this more fun for you and more fun for us by letting your inner Couch GM out and getting involved.
Thank you again for listening to the Couch GM podcast. For Tyler Snyder and Cody Roadcap, I'm George Kerth, and we'll see you all next week.